Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Piercarlo Padon. I'm the chairman of UniCredit Bank. So this is one reason for welcoming you in this beautiful building. The other reason is that I also have the privilege of being the vice president of the Istituto Affari Internazionali, which is sponsoring this very important event. So welcome twice and enjoy the evening. Only a few words to kick off the conversation. I guess we all share the view that we are living in unprecedented times in terms of overlapping crisis and reactions, which adding to confusion, but more importantly, it's adding to a sense of lack of control over the global governance process. It is a challenge for multilateralism. It is a challenge for governance. It is bringing with it the risk of deep fragmentation. There is therefore a great task ahead for all of those who believe in multilateralism, all of those who believe in the role of global institutions as the vehicles of a strengthening collaboration and as a necessary condition for peaceful development. Having said that, I will stop here. I will thank you once again for being here, and I'll leave the floor to Nathalie Tocci. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Piercarlo. It's a real pleasure, a real joy to be hosted by you here in UniCredit. In fact, a very warm thanks to UniCredit for hosting us here. And a very warm welcome to all of you. So on behalf of the Institute for International Affairs, just a couple of words on the Nexus project. This is a project which we started several months ago already. A project supported by the Mercator Foundation that IAI conducts together with the UN Foundation. Now, when we started this project, we knew that the nexus was an important thing. So we knew that for multilateralism to work, what was essential was that policy silos were broken down and that the defense community had to talk to the development community, that had to talk to the migration community, that had to talk to the agriculture, the food community, and so on and so forth. But in all fairness, we didn't quite realize just how important the nexus is. And as today we're in the midst of a war that has totally shattered, in many respects, the foundations of multilateralism as it was established after the end of the Second World War. In a sense, this both creates, obviously, a moment of very profound uncertainty concerning the future, but in some respects also a set of perhaps opportunities of how to rethink multilateralism moving forward. And particularly given that precisely this war is highlighting the nexus in practice. As we speak, 20 odd million tons of grain are stuck in the port of Odessa. It is very clear that that grain will not get out of Odessa without a military component. So here we have a situation in which food security, which is obviously connected then to development, to the situation in the Middle East, in Africa, the impact that this will have on future refugee and migration flows is sort of intimately connected to the security, including the defense dynamics in the Black Sea. So how to tackle these questions, be it from the food security angle, be it through the migration angle, the security and the defense angle, really have to be thought together. So in many respects, this gives us an opportunity not only to understand what these interconnections are, but what the respective multilateral institutions be it the UN agencies, be it the European Union, be it the UN system as a whole, how is it that we can both restructure ourselves internally and learn how to work together differently in order to address a nexus, which is now not simply something abstract, which we kind of sense is important, but we don't quite realize how important it is, but really make sure that this is operational in practice. So without further ado, let me very briefly introduce our speakers to you. You will be moderated by the coordinator of our project, Michael Wirtz, from, well, he was both a fellow at the Institute for International Affairs, as well as obviously a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. A very warm welcome to Ambassador Cindy McCain, US Permanent Representative to the UN agencies in Rome, as well as to Arif Hussain, Chief Economist and Director of Research Assessment and Monitoring at the World Food Programme. So great thanks to you. I'm sure that Arantxa, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain and current Dean of Sciences Po in Paris, I'm sure she will be joining us at some point. Hopefully she has already joined. And without further ado, let me give the floor to Michael that will be moderating this discussion. Michael.
Thank you, UniCredit, for hosting us today, and thank you, Ambassador McCain and Mr. Hussain, and hopefully soon former Foreign Minister Gonzalez for joining us today. We know you have very busy schedules, and we really appreciate you being here because we feel that this is not an issue of immediate urgency, but it goes beyond the immediacy. This crisis is throwing a flashlight on how we do business, on how we organize nutrition, on what and how we eat, on how we organize our energy resources, and how we organize our societies. So this is really a crucial moment. I think it is hard to overstate the issue. And so I'm very grateful that you decided to join us here on this panel. As Natalie has mentioned, our project started what now feels like a lifetime before the Ukraine war. Wars have the tendency to extend time periods. The last 60 or 70 days, they feel like a much longer time period than they actually represent in real time. And we had hoped to gather a lot of attention with our project, but not in this context. And we feel the urgency and the responsibility now to make sure that this terrible crisis does not go away, as so many crises have gone before, without leaving a deep imprint on how we do business in the multilateral arena. So I'd like to ask you to give us a quick introductory statement, a state of affairs of where you think we stand. And I'd like to start with you, Ambassador McCain. It is a great honor to have you here. You have been involved in these issues. You're a co-chair of the Sedona Forum, which is a forum in Arizona that is exactly dealing with these interconnected issues. And we're very, very interested in hearing of how you look at things, how the United States is addressing these issues, and what your experiences have been so far as the US ambassador to the UN agencies here in Rome. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm very grateful, even though this is a tragic situation, to be here talking about this issue. Because for years, those of us who worked in this issue would scream, stamp our feet, try to get anybody to listen to us about this issue. And of course, it was usually on the back burner. I'm sorry we've come to this, but I'm also grateful now because the world is paying attention. I realize we can thank CNN and the other news agencies for this. But for once, everyone, you go to a dinner, you see your friends, you're talking about food security. That's what we should be doing. It's for me and for all of us, as we know, this is the worst situation that we've seen food-wise since World War II, and possibly even more now. And but this food crisis has been building for a while, and not just because of the war, but But with climate change, the involvement of climate change, the inability of countries to be able to grow their own supplies and feed their own people. This has always been a problem, but it seems even more expounded now. And certainly prior to the war, at least, droughts and floods and heat waves are all part of it, as you know, and of course, the most deadly of all this is chaos and conflict, and that's where we're at right now. I was with all of you, I was at the Munich Security Conference before, as you know, it was before the war broke out. And I listened to Zelensky and I listened to Klitschko and all the other folks that were there. And some of the first words they were saying was food security, food security, food security. It's something that we are as a multilateral mission and a group that deals specifically with these issues are working very hard. But I know I can speak for the folks at my mission and my embassy. I feel like I've lived 2 lifetimes in the last 8-10 weeks. This is a problem that we as a world, I am happy to say, have come together. We are working together. We may not agree on every nuanced point, but we are together on this issue, not only in discussing the fact that this is an illegal war, number one, but number two, the fact that we've got to figure out a way, not only how to feed our immediate needs, but also what we do in the long term to be able to grow more with less, to be able to feed a continent of Africa, because climate change has almost wiped it out. Just after the war broke out, but prior to the real heated part of it now, I had a pre-planned trip to Madagascar and Africa and Kenya. And what I saw in Madagascar was World Food Program having to cut your rations in half because of this. So it's this ripple effect that this is having around the world is so deadly and so unbelievably disbelievable that we as a world and a nation that believe in the rights of every human being are now working together on just these issues and trying to figure out a way that we can help each other and how we can help others, the larger needs, as you know. I'm very proud to be on the stage with WFP and working with them. I worked with them for a long time through the years, but the amazing work that you all are doing and have done all the time, but specifically in this crisis, has been absolutely unbelievable. And I know you've already won a Nobel Peace Prize, but you ought to get another one, I think, for what you're doing. And may I also say on this too, the challenges that we are facing, as I said, are immense. But I truly believe in the power and the promise of the multilateral system. I work in it every day, I believe in it, and I believe in what it stands for, which is a world coming together. And I believe we can, in the midst of all this, change the course of history if we stick to what we truly believe in and work together. So I'm going to stop at that because I know we have a lot of questions. And thank you for having me, most importantly, and I look forward to the conversation.
Professor, let me just be very brief. Maybe WFP Director Beasley and the German Agriculture Minister and others. What is your feeling? It took the Munich Security Conference quite a while to put climate, migration, food on the agenda. They finally have done that. Do you see a similar reorientation or more attention within the US government? Do you have more people at State Department, at the National Security Council, maybe even at the Pentagon, paying attention, requiring information and input from you than this was the case, let's say, 5 years ago?
Most definitely. I was always the one, I was like the chihuahua in the room. I was always biting everybody's ankles, trying to get them to listen to me. And now I don't have to do that. I'm sorry I don't have to do that for the obvious reasons. But now we see a Munich Security Conference, Halifax Forum, the other Davos especially, now talking about this issue. But we have come a long way. And I will add one other topic that fits in with all this, and that's human trafficking and, of course, our migrant situation as well. It is part of national security. It is part of world security. And I'm glad that now people are beginning to address it as such, as a combined issue. It's not single siloed issues. It's all together, and we have to work for the very reasons I just talked about.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Mr. Hussein, you're the chief economist of the World Food Program. You have extensive global experience, including in Latin America. You've just come back from a trip to Ukraine. Give us a little bit of a snapshot of what is happening on the ground, and then if you will, talk a little bit about, are we seeing structural impacts and changes that the ambassador has spoken about, that this is bringing countries and multilateral organizations together? But will we for once really make a step forward, or even 2 or 3 steps, because we have to catch up for lost time? And how do you see this playing out in the next few months and years?
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Ambassador, for the kind words. Hello, everybody. Let me just start by saying that one thing people don't realize is that all of this is not happening in a vacuum. We were already in trouble. We were in big trouble. When we talk about high food prices, before Ukraine happened, the prices were at a 10-year high. Fuel prices were at a 7-year high. We had record inflation in the US, UK, what to talk of poor countries. We had huge debt levels, huge debt distress. 60% of low-income countries right now are in high debt distress. People had spent, the governments, big and small, in the first 18 months of COVID, had spent upwards of $26 trillion. That's 30% of the global GDP dealing with COVID. Its economic consequences, medical consequences. And that's why we are seeing currencies left, right, and center tumbling. That's why we are seeing defaults. So this is all very real. And then comes war in Ukraine. And Michael, to your point, I don't think any place is spared by it. Just another number, I'm sorry, I'm an economist, I can't talk unless I use numbers. 36 countries import upwards of 50% of their wheat requirements from this region, Russia and Ukraine. That's a very big deal. And when countries, let's say if you were importing from Ukraine at a good time, right? And now you don't get your food from that place, you go elsewhere. Guess what happens there? Prices go up because you have created additional demand in a place where you didn't have that demand before. So guess what? Your price is up in places which were directly dealing with Ukraine, and then you have prices up in places which were indirectly hurting. This is why you're seeing such levels of inflation, food inflation, around the world. Yeah, I was in Ukraine. I think if it wasn't clear before, it became very, very clear after. Couple of things. One, indiscriminate killing of people. We went from Moldova to Odessa by road. My boss, David Beasley, and I, we were there. We went with the CBS. We saw, I don't know how many of you saw this building where, a grandmother, a mother, and a child were killed in an instant in the same place. We saw that. We went to the ports. We saw the bridges bombed, or at least we knew about the bridges bombed the very same days. We had to huddle because sirens were going on. So for me, the biggest thing is that this is very real. And what is happening on the Black Sea is terrible for Ukraine from an economic standpoint, but is also extremely bad for the rest of the world. You know why? It's not only about those 20 million tons which are stuck. It is also about our ability. Food is not something you can grow overnight. You have to plan, right? And that is a problem, right? So you cannot grow it overnight. And imagine the people we are dealing with who spend on a good day 50% of their budget and more on food. How are they supposed to deal with this? One, and by the way, in WFP we say we were dealing with 4 C's: conflict, climate, COVID, and higher cost before. Now on top of that, we got 3 F's: food, fuel, and fertilizer. So you were getting C's as academic, and then you get 3 F's. You failed, period, right? I mean, this is what we are actually dealing with going forward. Let me put this in a couple of other numbers. World Food Program, when World Food Program sets records, it's not a good day for the world. When I'm sitting here talking about this, it's not a good day for the world. We set a record in our 60-year history in 2020 by feeding 115.5 million people. We set another record in 2021, Ambassador, 128 million people. And now we are looking at feeding upwards of 147 million people. And you know what our bill is for that? The expenditures? $21.5 billion. If we were to do this right, it would cost us $21.5 billion. You know how our costs have changed? Pre-COVID to now, 44% higher. In numbers, that's $72 million more per month. With that $72 million, we could feed 4 million people every month. These are the realities in which, Michael, we are working right now.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. And again, a very brief follow-up question with asking you for a brief answer. We see 2 very different ways of reacting to the current crisis. We have the initiative of the German government on global food security that has been taken up by the G7. That's a step towards multilateral engagement, which at least from the outside looks serious. We have a number of very important countries establishing export restrictions on food staples. How is this going to play out? What is your best guess? Are we going to err on the side of national interest-driven, close your border policies? Or is this really a qualitatively different moment in which we have a chance to move the multilateral system into the right direction?
Okay, on let me give you a little bit of good news. I mean, on the multilateral side, World Bank, IMF, WTO, and World Food Program, different animals came together on one press release asking for the same thing. And you know, the biggest thing over there is export bans, is exemption of humanitarian assistance. It's feeding people, giving the right safety nets, rightly targeted safety nets for people, assisting people in need, and also not going to sleep after this crisis is over. Because what we need to do takes time. And we need to stay together with this problem statement, which we have. First time we all agree, I was telling Ambassador and Michael earlier, in my 20 years, I've never seen such consensus on the problem statement. Everybody agrees what the problem is, and everybody agrees what the solution is. Now, if we can get just to the point of implementing that solution, I think we did good. We did very good. And you know why I say that is, people forget, we have been here before. This is the problem of being an analyst. We've been here before. We were here in 2008. By the way, export restrictions did not work. Nationalism did not work. We saw it. If that wasn't enough, we saw it again in 2011. Same story. That was the start of Arab Spring. Then come to COVID, people actually listened and they did not put as many export restrictions. And we saw that there was a benefit of that. And now we are back to export restrictions. And I think anybody and everybody with a mic should be saying, don't do this, doesn't help you, it still raises your prices. And frankly, starving your neighbor is never a good policy.
Thank you. So we're now joined by the former Foreign Minister of Spain, Arantxa. Can you hear us in Davos? You can. That is great. So we don't suffer an Apollo 13 moment here. I'm very grateful for that. I was wondering if you could provide a little bit of a snapshot of the discussions that you are hearing in Davos at the World Economic Forum, because we find ourselves in a situation where we all of a sudden realize that our supply chains are so thin and so fragile that with a terrible but relatively localized conflict in Ukraine, we are dealing with global repercussions that are reaching from Brazil to China and from Canada to South Africa, including the Middle East, the Levant, and the Arab Peninsula and Northern Africa. So is there a discussion about the fact that we have been running the margins a little too tight? And if so, what is your feeling about the debates at the WEF and Davos? Is the business community prepared to make a significant contribution to addressing these issues?
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I hope you can hear me. I've been following the conversation, and of course, the description that we just heard is exactly what's happening on the market. A perfect storm of three big elements coming together: food prices, fuel prices, and fertilizer prices. All of them compounded at the period when countries are barely exiting the last crisis, let's not forget, which was driven by COVID, and that led to huge tensions on the fiscal side of countries that had to fight a pandemic, basically spending. So there isn't much left to face the enormous impact that these three components would bring in terms of greater inflation and huge pressures on the population that is the poorest in every country. So basically, the question we are left with is, what do we do now? And I think the consensus view is that we need to work on two fronts. First, there is the short term, the most immediate one. On the most immediate one is obviously to make sure that the food that is available, because there is plenty of food available in many places, is brought to the places where it's needed. And this essentially means paying a much closer attention to the logistics value chains. I think this is something that I know the Director General of the World Trade Organization has been discussing with the industry, with the logistics, with the transport, that need to make a very quick contribution now to bring the food from where it is to where it's needed. Second part of the answer, short term, on this, I am totally aligned with Hussein, maybe because I've also inhabited in past lives the World Trade Organization, is do not take export restrictions, do not take export bans, do not restrict exports of food, because what this causes is spiraling of prices in other constituencies. What we have seen with the export restrictions that have been adopted in the past weeks is an increase in food prices by 7 percentage points, compounding an already serious problem. So I would advise for using trade as the mechanism that can help us bring the food to where it's needed and preventing export restrictions that will compound the problem for everyone. Obviously, this is not enough. It's not enough. And obviously, there is a big also need to support very strongly the humanitarian agencies in the United Nations, starting with the World Food Programme, to make sure they bring the food to those that are at the base of the pyramid and cannot wait for us to solve our medium to long-term issues. So what many of us have been saying here in Davos to the business community, to the philanthropists, to the governments, is put money to make sure that we do not let people starve now. Now, this is not enough. We also need to look at the medium to long-term structural changes that will be necessary in order for events like this one to not occur with the harshness with which it's happening today. The first one we know, and it's been with us for a while, is making our agricultural systems much more climate resilient. This is the road of investing in sustainability, investing in reducing CO2 emissions, and working to help the agricultural sector become more climate resilience. But the second part of the medium to long-term exercise is just simply about tackling poverty. Because what we see with events like we are seeing today is that obviously inflation, higher prices, difficulties in accessing food has a disproportionate impact on countries and communities that are living under extreme poverty. So we have to go back to the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals agenda in the United Nations, which had as an object, as a purpose, to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030, looking at the multifaceted interventions that are needed to do that. So let's not drop the Sustainable Development Goals agenda from our radar. It contains a big part of the medium to long-term response to this problem. Obviously, for that, a bit more international cooperation would be essential, which is why our narrative cannot be, if we want to eradicate extreme poverty, it cannot be to entertain power politics or geopolitics, but it must be to remind people that they have a duty and a responsibility towards international cooperation.
Thank you. Let me also follow up here, because I think we all agree that this is not an issue that we can address with philanthropic support alone. But Arantxa, again to you, in the context that you find yourself in Davos with international business leaders, is there any more critical discussion about the fact that the argument for free trade was always twofold? A, it decreases cost and for the consumer and the producers, and B, it brings the world together. We now know that A, we are exposed to crises that eradicate these gains in consumer prices or in cost of production within weeks. And secondly, I think, if you want to put it a little simplistically, if you trade with autocratic states, it does not produce democracy, but it produces autocracy. So is there any discussion about a risk premium that companies need to factor in if they do business with countries that behave like Russia does right now, and basically creates a disequilibrium in the entire global community, not only politically, but also economically? Because my feeling is that this discussion has been lacking in past years. Is there any semblance of such a debate that you've heard so far, granted that Davos only started yesterday?
Well, yes, there is a debate that is happening. It's happening here, but it's happening all around the world, which is about inputting more the geopolitical risks into the risk matrix of every company and of every country. It's basically, that's what we mean when we talk about resilience, is making sure that we do not forget there are risks that we have to take into account, and that geopolitical risks are today much higher than they probably were a few years ago. Now, having said that, Michael, and leaving aside the specifics of Russia, I think on Russia it's pretty clear that whether it's governments or businesses have understood that they wanted to sanction what Russia had done. They wanted to sanction not Russia or Russian people, but the behavior of basically flouting international rules, jumping over very sacred basic principles in international law, like sovereignty, like territorial integrity, and rights of people. And I think the international community has been, by and large, pretty clear about that, and countries and companies, businesses, more than 680 businesses have exited Russia because they thought they did not want to work in an environment where Vladimir Putin had trumped international rules to such a terrible extent. Now, let's face it, Michael, geopolitical risks have changed, but the law of economics have not changed. So we still are confronted with the hard reality of the law of economics, the law of comparative advantages. And what this tells us is that open markets, I never liked to talk about free markets, but open markets, if properly regulated and if properly accompanied by domestic and international rules that would ensure a level playing field, work better than trade protectionism. This is what we have learned. And these are the two parameters within which the international community has to operate if it wants to use what works of open markets, but make sure also that there are clear rules of the game that we are going to be respecting across the board.
Thank you very much. I have one more question for each of the panelists here in Rome, and please feel free to also comment on what Arantxa just has described. And then after that, I'd like to open it up to the audience. So please signal if you're interested in asking a question. We have microphones here in the room, so we make the best of our time. Mr. Hossain, let me start with you. The Eurasia Group has just published a food security analysis that has been presented in Davos today. And so this is a little bit out of left field, but they put a scale from 1 to 5 from issue of concern to the perfect storm to describe how institutions, scientists, and multilateral organizations would assess the current situation. And it is interesting, it struck me that the FAO said it was category 1, it was an issue of concern. The WFP said it was category 4, which was catastrophic. You described that there was strong unity in the multilateral system and that you feel you have kind of history on your side, so to speak. Are there still discrepancies that we need to look out for, or do you feel confident that we are more or less on the same page?
Nice question.
I know.
No, it's apples and oranges. What FAO is saying, that is about chronic hunger. So they're saying that chronic hunger will increase from about 8 million people to 13 million people because of this crisis. But the number for chronic hunger to begin with for 2021 was 811 million people, right? We are in the business of acute hunger, which is supposed to be small right now. Unfortunately, that's not turning out to be the case in many places, but it's transitory. Something happened because of which. And over there, our figures are in line with everybody else's, including the Global Report on Food Crisis, which said that in 53 countries which were analyzed, there were 193 million people who were in crisis or worse situation. For us, that number is 323. Why? Because we are present, we are working in 80 countries. So the Global Report on Food Crisis is a subset of where we are. So there are logical explanations. But when you see this, you say, oh, but this is not right. But I think we need to be better in terms of how we throw these figures out. Just a couple of other things I wanted to say was picking up from Sanchez. Right now, it is an affordability crisis. Food is available all over the place, but it is expensive. So it's an affordability crisis. But if we are unable to solve the fertilizer issue, if we are unable to solve the agricultural input issue, and almost now, next year, it is going to be an availability crisis, which will just push the prices way further up. And I think for Africa, which has a demand of about 2 million tons of fertilizers as we speak. It's a very big deal. And I think we need to sort of deal with that. And one other thing I didn't say it earlier. Basically, what we are seeing right now is leadership in the global community also. That's a very big positive. US just came out, President Biden signed the bill for Ukraine, $40 billion. Guess what? $5 billion out of that for food security. Germany doing something similar. UK doing something similar, smaller scale, but still similar. But what would be great is if the Gulf countries did something similar as well. Because if you look at the numbers in terms of their revenue increases, they're staggering. I was on an IMF panel today, earlier I'm just doing panels. I think if I'm not wrong, their estimate was about $1.4 trillion. I mean, so in that, I said that to them as well. I was like, look, I mean, wouldn't that be great if you can just take care of the region and then the rest of the world can focus on the rest of the world, and suddenly we have resources. And the very last thing I wanted to say was, look, this problem is about extremely thin export markets. Less than 10 markets make up our basic staples exports for rice, for corn, for coarse grain, for soybean, for wheat. Less than 10. But you know what? The stocks, less than 5, hold 80-90% of these stocks. I would challenge you, I don't think a single person in this room with an investment portfolio has one single stock in their portfolio or one single asset class. So we wouldn't do it for ourselves, for our investments at home, but we do it for global food security. I mean, how does that make sense? And this is something which is not going to be sorted out today or tomorrow. This is the medium term. And if we do this, maybe next time around we're in a better state to deal with it than we are this time around. Sorry for the long answer, but I thought this needed to be said.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hussain. Ambassador McCain, it is, at least from my perspective, in Washington, an entirely new dynamic. People in the Pentagon have learned how to spell fertilizer, and they are talking about organic nutritions in a way that they have not talked about half a year ago. How do you say the U.S. responsibility and leadership role playing out? And what are the next steps that you're suggesting to the Biden administration and other partners to overcome the challenges that Mr. Hussain has so eloquently described?
Well, first of all, I would like to comment on one thing that you mentioned, and that is the U.S. government passing a bill that was a $40 billion bill, $5 billion of which goes to food security. That's unprecedented because as of late, the U.S. government couldn't agree on anything. So this is the one area that we have come together. But let me say this though also, the Pentagon and our National Security Agency and all the others have always worked on these issues. They've always worked together on these issues. It just hasn't been front and center. So I think what we're seeing at least from within the United States and where we want to go with it is exactly what Secretary Blinken did, and that was to not only raise awareness, but to begin focusing on this as a world for a world. And that's just what took place in New York at the UN, at the ministerial. I will also say I've never seen a president more devoted or dedicated to the humanitarian purpose than this president. And I say that having been a humanitarian my entire adult life. I'm grateful for someone that understands these issues, but really puts his money where his mouth is with them. So I think we as a world, though, to go back to the multilateral, and I'll make this short, we as a world, as you have so eloquently stated, have come together. We are working together, but there are some issues within some of the UN agencies where they weren't quite as quick as they could have been in recognizing the fact that this was a war and using those words and saying the things that needed to be said. But with that said, the agencies now have all come together and are working very diligently to try to solve this crisis. But again, I like to, it's a joke, but it's really not. Sometimes I feel like at the UN we're dragging a wet sandbag. And you just have to keep dragging it, and eventually your back's going to go out, but you'll make the point. We see at our mission the dedication of people like Anne and others that work. We have 20 people in our embassy, and that's all. And the kind of people that work on this issue 24/7 every day to make sure that we can take a step forward each day. It may not be a big step, but it's a step forward and not a step back. And so I'm very proud to call myself a humanitarian, but to work with other humanitarians who work on this issue daily.
Can one make the argument that after the previous government in the United States that openly attacked the multilateral system, this is also an issue where the United States needs to take a leadership role because of enlightened self-interest to repair its reputation and show that the world still matters?
I don't think it's political at all. It's the right thing to do. I don't see politics, at least from the U.S. side, playing into this at all. Knowing the president the way I do and knowing the people around him the way I do.
Thank you. Let me open it up, and please let me know. You are first. Please be so kind to briefly introduce yourself and let us know your name. And if possible, direct your question or intervention to one of the three panelists. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Kira Finke. I'm from the German Council on Foreign Relations, and my question goes to Mr. Hussein around the issue of fertilizer. I was just wondering whether the fertilizer crisis is not also one of distributional issues, because we have many countries that are overusing fertilizer, not least my own country, Germany, but also in the US, where we see very negative effects on our oceans, oxygen depletion of large scale, where no life is possible anymore. So isn't it more a question of distribution rather than the question of scarcity? Because what we're seeing, for example, in Brazil, is that this narrative of fertilizer scarcity is used for economic deregulation in the Amazon basin by the Brazilian government. So there is an issue with this question of, is there really a scarcity of fertilizer, or shouldn't we just reduce the use in some areas and increase it in others? Thank you.
Okay, let me take two more. Who's else? Janani, please.
Hi, my name's Janani Vivekananda. Thank you to all the presenters. It was really interesting. I'd like to pick up on a point that Mr. Hussein made when you said to anyone that has a platform, pick up a microphone and say, don't ban, to speak out against export restrictions. That's great to use words, but I wondered, since we're talking about multilateralism, do any of the panelists have thoughts on what diplomatic measures could be adopted? We touched on some of the economic incentives, but is there anything in the diplomatic toolbox that can kind of incentivize this further beyond just words, either bilaterally or multilaterally?
Thank you. And one more, if there is interest. Anyone else? Okay, then let me get the fertilizer question to you, Mr. Hussein, and then maybe Arantxa and the ambassador can speak about the export control question. That's okay.
So you're right on the first one. Is it a distributional issue right now? Yes, of course it is, because the distribution is disrupted, right? Now, if you look at the price of fertilizer, it is 2 to 3-fold higher in many countries as we speak. The second point which you're raising, I think that's a very important point, which is this fertilizer environmentally friendly? Is there anything else we could do, right? But that question was valid before this crisis, and it will be valid after this crisis. So if you're going to change stuff, you need time to actually do that. You're not able to change things in a crisis. Like, imagine if I'm a farmer, and I have an issue of that I don't have the fertilizer, which I'm a smallholder farmer in the place, right? Frankly, I don't even know what you mean by agroecological fertilizer in the many, because I've not been informed, told all of the above, right? So all I can do is that either not use it or use half of it, and then my productivity goes. So many people, including we need to use this as an opportunity to actually push on that side. But that is not to say that you do it in the next 3 months and you will be fine. No, you will miss the agricultural season if you don't do this. And if you miss the agricultural season, the people I'm talking about, they will starve. So yes, on the environment, yes, on doing something about it in the near to medium term, talking about it, but at the same time making sure that we have the fertilizer right now, which they were using last year and the year before, so they don't miss the season. You see what I mean? That's where we need to be in the near term.
Let me ask you what to do about export restriction. Also keeping in mind that the alliance that has been condemning the Russian invasion in Ukraine to begin with is economically very powerful, but numerically not in the majority when it comes to the entire global environment or the United Nations for that matter. So how do you address these issues from a diplomatic and foreign policy perspective?
Well, let me first comment on this last comment that you make. Maybe we've not been good enough in framing this conversation and framing the reaction to war in Ukraine, because it's not about the West against the rest of the world. It's a fight between those countries that believe in a world based on an international system based on rules, on institutions, on obligations, and those that believe simply in power politics, in just simply might makes right. And that is an alliance that, in my view, this is the narrative that we need to use, because this is a narrative that resonates everywhere around the world. Second point I wanted to make, I think today we have a problem of affordability, very big, but we also have a problem of logistics. Traffic through the Bosphorus is down 90% in this last 2 months. And that is because a big part of the cereals that would otherwise have been shipped through the Bosphorus coming out of Russia and Ukraine are not leaving that territory, going to where it's needed. This part also needs to be fixed in the short term. Now, to the question on export restrictions, this is an unfinished business in the rules of international trade. The rules are much more developed on imports than they are on exports. And a big part of our collective endeavor should be to strengthen the rules limiting unilateralism on export restrictions. But while we do that, because we know this will take a bit of time, maybe there is an opportunity for diplomacy. There is an upcoming World Trade Organization ministerial conference taking place in mid-June in Geneva. It would be good if many countries, as many as possible, if possible, all of them, were to sign a declaration much along the lines of the declaration that the leaders of the WTO, the World Bank, the IMF, and the World Food Programme did recently, to say that they will not use export restrictions, because that, which is a diplomatic gesture, will be understood by markets immediately.
But is this realistic? Narendra Modi has elections coming up. India is a big rice exporter. The situation is very dire. There are other countries that have similar attitudes. Is this enough to say let's all come together and try to create non-binding standards, or do we need to do more than that?
Of course, we need to change the rules, but as we work to change the rules, because we know very well that changing the rule takes time, what we can do is use our political voice to say what we need to say today, which is that export restrictions will not help solve the food crisis. It will not help in Africa, it will not help in India, it will not help in Latin America, it will not help anywhere. Something along those lines was already done back in 2008. I was at the time associated with this effort in the G20, which clearly said this is not the avenue we want to pursue.
Thank you. Ambassador, is this a discussion that you're having as well?
I would like to address, first of all, the diplomatic efforts on behalf of the export issue. We saw results of that came out of this ministerial that just took place in New York, and there were several more. I'm going to say several because I'm not sure the number. I think it's either 2 or 3 countries went back on what they were going to do, and now will export. So that was a success. I mean, this is a tough issue, but it is very important in anything we can do diplomatically, such as sign an agreement, such as sign an MOU, whatever it may be, to help stop this is absolutely what we should be doing. It's more than diplomatic. It's the right thing to do. And so I always prevail in the folks that I talk with on all this is, yes, diplomatically, it's correct. Diplomatically, we should be working together as always, but it's also the right thing to do.
Thank you. Natalie, do we have a microphone for her? And is there anyone else that would like to intervene, Mr. Seidenberger? Yep. Anyone else? Okay, then I take 3 questions at a time and then we'll have a concluding one.
Well, so I wanted to go back to nexus thinking, and in particular in reference to not only in general Ukraine, but in particular getting the grain out of the port of Odessa. And nexus thinking, particularly as far as the food security defense nexus is concerned. Now, to the best of my understanding, but Arif, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this, it is probably impossible to get the grain out of Ukraine only by land. So the question really is doing something about the naval blockade. And of course, the only thing that can be done about a naval blockade is a naval operation to break the blockade. So here is where the defense food security nexus comes in. And I was just wondering if all 3, in fact, could comment on, I think, what is a very interesting initiative that has now out from Lithuania with the backing of the United Kingdom. I think it'd be extremely interesting. In an ideal world, this would be a European operation, but getting 27 to agree is not going to be easy. In the second best world, it would probably be a multinational coalition, a coalition of the willing, but I think it'd be extremely important for it to be associated with the UN agencies, for it not to also be looked at as a military operation. This is a humanitarian operation with the need for force protection, given that this is happening in the midst of a war. So if I could just perhaps get your reactions to that idea, its feasibility and its desirability.
Thank you, Natalie. And Ambassador Seidenberger is next. Microphone is over here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Ulrich Seidenberger. I'm the German ambassador to the UN organizations here in Rome, to the Rome-based agencies, and colleague of Cindy McCain. I think first of all, thanks all panelists for their very interesting interventions. I think the topic of this seminar is shaping multilateralism, and I would like to pick up on something that Ambassador McCain mentioned. We are now working together, believing in the power and promise of the multilateral system, no singling or not tackling issues in their silos. And Arif Hussein mentioned this common problem statement. I'm wondering, don't we have to think a little bit bigger? I had the privilege when I was president of the executive board of WFP in 2020 to organize, it was on the occasion of the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize to WFP, a high-level panel with the Secretary General and all leaders of the great international institutions like World Bank, IMF, African Union, European Union. And the title of this event was Breaking Down Silos in a Moment of Historical Crisis, and that was the COVID crisis at the time. Well, now, as we heard, all of these cascades of crisis have been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. Isn't the question now even more relevant than it was in 2020, whether we have to break down the institutional silos? And therefore, I believe that this global alliance for food security that was initiated by the G7, but that is not limited to the G7, might not be actually a platform that helps us to now create something much more agile, action-oriented, taking it out of the tedious policy pickering discussions in the governing bodies of all these single institutions and creating something holistic, synergetic, temporary. It should not be a new institution, but it should be a mechanism that helps to facilitate support now. I think that would be worthwhile to perhaps discuss it further in the next discussions.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman next to you, please.
Thank you. My name is Morten Osland. I'm Norway's ambassador to the RBAs. I wanted to pick up a point made by my colleague to the left here, and we didn't speak before the meeting, but I think she addressed something which bears directly on the relationship between what one has to do urgently and what one has to do in the long term. And it's a very important issue, because when you're in a situation like you are now, you have to address the first things first, and it's life, and it's very urgent. But at the same time, and Arif Hussain was saying this, that this crisis that we are now faced with comes into a context that was already there. And that context was addressed in particular by the UN Food Systems Summit. And while it provided some sort of a blueprint, it hasn't so far provided real results. But that context is that 800 plus million people are food insecure before the Ukraine crisis. We are breaking down global biosecurity, oceans, etc., and there is both undernourishment, malnourishment, and hunger. And there is a blueprint. So, and the question is addressed perhaps in particular to Arantxa Gonzalez, if you're picking up anything at all on this at Davos and also with the private sector, because there is a real risk, and the fertilizer example is one. One must not do things to address the short-term urgencies that badly hit the blueprint, so to speak, for going forward in a sustainable longer-term and middle-term manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you for addressing your question to Arantxa, because the previous speakers have done something that makes moderators very nervous, because they have addressed all three panelists. We are about to approach the time of our aperitivo in order to get over our collective depression after discussing these issues. So you have 3 minutes each to address all the issues that have been brought up by the last three speakers. And I'll start with Arantxa before we again run into connectivity issues with our friends in Davos.
Okay, let me just unmute myself. A couple of comments. One on the need to organize better the response, bringing everyone together. I still remember the food crisis in 2008, and there was a big coming together, especially on the UN side and Bretton Woods institutions to coordinate the actions that are necessary. Second, to Natalie's point, I think it is extremely important that we couch this as a humanitarian corridor that is necessary to exit this food now with the necessary logistics, because that is part of sending a signal that markets will at least work partially. And three, to the last question, yes, I think there is more and more the sense that what we need to do is build resilience medium to long term, that we cannot just simply put band-aids every time we've got a crisis, that we have to do. But in addition to this, we need to build a more resilient economy moving forward that looks at fixing the structural deficiencies that are well identified.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hussain.
Thank you. So let me start with Natalie's question. I think I think it is critically important that food flows, essential commodities flow out of the Black Sea. I don't mean just flow, but affordable, right? That means Russian also, because Russian commodities may be flowing out, but they're still not affordable, right? The prices are too high for them to be affordable. And then they're going to a different market and altogether. So for me, the only, I have a slightly different view than Sanchez on this and from you also. Look, humanitarian is a drop in the bucket when you look at the bigger scheme of things, right? If you look at total global exports, we are less than 1%, less than 1%. So if you let us, our stuff comes out, not enough. Not going to move the needle on the prices or anything, right? But it will be a political win. So we don't want that. We want commercial to move, because when commercial moves, that will bring our prices down as well. You know, so for me, I mean that. The second point on that also, if we don't do it through the sea, at least in the near term, you cannot do it by land or by rail. It just is not feasible, period. We can talk about that on the aperitivo, but that's the thing. Coming to Ambassador Morton's point, sir, I think this is an opportunity. I think this crisis is an opportunity to do things differently, going forward on the environment side, on the fertilizer side. It definitely is an opportunity. But that's near to medium term. We need to be talking about what needs to happen, but right now, we cannot change. Because if we change, these people miss their agricultural season. And that's something we just don't want to happen. Because remember, they're using the same fertilizer for year after year after year for many years, basically, right? I'm talking Africa smallholder farmers. I'm not talking big companies. And Ambassador Seilberg, I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to raise the game. I think the game has already been raised. We didn't see this kind of response, even for COVID. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But even for COVID, we did not see this kind of willingness, this kind of camaraderie between the world in a way. And I think that is something which got us to the agreeing on the problem statement. Now let's make sure that we are able to implement the solutions, because that is going to take longer, and usually our attention spans are much shorter. That is probably the biggest risk I see. Right now we are all there. Tomorrow this war ends and we go back to sleep. I don't think we can afford that.
Thank you. Ambassador McCain, you have the last word.
I'd like to address the mining and the corridors especially. All of these things have got to be imperative to be able to move any kind of food, agricultural products, whatever is out of there. But the bottom line is the Russians have mined over half of the agricultural lands in Ukraine and mined the equipment to do it with. And we can't send in at this point Halo Trust or MAG or any of the other agencies that do that because it's unsafe. So it like all of us, we're, you know, the bottom line here is the Russians need to get out. That's how we fix this. But in the meantime, your point about working together, no silos, is well taken. I mean, we've all talked about this in the dinners and the various things that we've gone to. And reshaping perhaps a little bit how the UN works, a little more nimble, a little more of the ability to be action-oriented rather than more not action. Is that a better way to put it? Anyway, that's really all I had to say, and I appreciate being here.
Thank you very much. Let me once again thank the panelists for making time. Let me thank the splendid team at the Instituto Affari Internazionale and the United Nations Foundation and our sponsor, the Stiftung Mercator. Obviously, our host, Unicredit. This is probably the most beautiful room I've ever been in. Let me just end on one note. Arif Hussain, you said that you're just doing panels. I think that's a good thing. This is a historical moment that we're living. It requires a broad conversation. This cannot be done by bureaucracies, policy elites, and decision makers alone. This needs broad buy-in from our societies across the world, not only in the Western countries that we, in our majority, represent here in this room, but it goes much further than that. So I think a broader conversation, an enlightened conversation about these issues is very important. And so I hope you keep doing panels. The same is true for our friend in Davos and the ambassador. It is really important for us that you made time tonight to be here and share your perspectives from very different angles on the issue. And without further ado, let's have a drink. Thank you.